Shadow Hack. Chapter 341, Continuous Losses. If Li Yunmu's guess was correct, then the disparity between the flux experts and fluxers was too great. An ambushed Hall Master had actually been capable of killing 4 descenders whose strength had been higher than that of Demon. With this, Li Yunmu gained a rough estimate of the strength of the flux experts in his world. Suo Lay's strength couldn't be doubted. From some aspects, he was almost like Li Yunmu, given that he possessed power, formidable physical defense, and explosive power. 1 physical cultivation method, 1 footwork skill, 2 martial skills in addition to the strength of 15 oxen was enough to pose a threat to descenders. Even without holding anything back, ordinary descenders who didn't possess any powerful trump cards or deadly weapons would find it extremely difficult to prevail over a physical expert who had formidable physical strength and cultivated himself in all aspects. It had to be said that this was the advantage of the formidable body that the natives of the origin world possessed. After Suo Lay took the stage, no one challenged him for a long time, even if this year's reward were far more generous in comparison. Li Yunmu knew that the 3 descenders definitely wouldn't let this opportunity pass. Since they had stepped into the territory of Blue Moon Island, then they definitely would use any means to enter it. From their group, the first who moved to scout the opponent's strength was a woman. This was an ordinary challenge in the eyes of all residents, but when this woman moved to attack, all the residents cried out in surprise. Flux Expert. When the flux energy erupted from the female descender, it caused everyone to realize that this woman on the stage was surprisingly a flux expert. And not a physical flux expert. Instantly, all the people turned silent, not even daring to breathe. They didn't even blink, afraid to miss even a moment of this kind of battle. It had to be said that the trio was similar to descenders from Li Yunmu's Earth, but their level of strength was completely different. The moment the woman attacked, Li Yunmu understood why Demon was only able to return with his life by using ghostly image substitution, this exceptionally outstanding life-saving technique. The woman's strength was at least equivalent to Li Qinghong's present strength. And this was the first person of the 3 who had moved, which meant that she was the weakest in the group. But even then, Li Qinghong, whose strength was rapidly improving, may not be able to win against her for certain. However, Suo Lay's strength made sure that the descenders were in for a surprise. With his strength of 15 oxen, the explosive power of every punch and kick he delivered was like an artillery shell. Although the female descender had extraordinary strength, she was still constrained under fear of Suo Lay's terrifying strength. When his successive punches with frighteningly enormous power bombarded her, Li Yunmu knew that she had lost. And sure enough, not much later, the woman was unable to fight back anymore and was blown off the stage by one of the punches, causing the residents to cry out in surprise. The female descender had stepped on the stage and unleashed her flux energy, which had caused the residents underneath to exclaim in astonishment. This was flux energy cultivated by flux experts. But in the end, she was defeated by a physical flux expert in 7 minutes and could only become an outer disciple of Blue Moon Island. As for attempting to become an inner disciple, that was completely in vain. Furthermore, this was a result when Suo Lay hadn't even attacked to kill, otherwise, she would have been dead long ago. How can there be such a weak flux expert? Yes, this outsider flux expert is too weak, she couldn't even prevail against a physical flux expert. The people standing under the stage were extremely astonished, while the hearts of descenders were at their lowest. Suo Lay's strength was far more formidable than what they had imagined. Originally, they believed that LUG had already been a disastrous lesson for them. By using up a large amount of their reserves and trump cards, they had expected to get rid of them. But it required an even heavier price. However, after LUG, his disciple became an obstacle for them, which was extremely difficult for them to accept. Perhaps that flux expert had just started cultivating flux energy. It must be known that the strength of Suo Lay's physical body has reached 15 oxen. By official standards, he can already start cultivating flux energy. The residents finally arrived at a reason which could make them accept this preposterous reality. Within the origin world, the threshold to become a flux expert from a physical flux expert was reaching 15 oxen's power with one's physical strength. This was the lowest line. Therefore, all flux experts of the origin world had once been physical flux experts who cultivated their bodies. This was a completely different system compared to that of Earth. In this world, flux experts cultivated both the strength of their flesh as well as flux energy and didn't have any flaws, unlike the fluxers who could even be killed by an ordinary person if they were careless and didn't activate their crystal armor on time. It could be said that there was an extremely clear boundary between flux experts and ordinary people. It was nearly impossible for ordinary people to kill a flux expert because the flux experts of the origin world were truly tyrannical. In addition, there weren't any large guns or artillery shells or nuclear weapons in the origin world, so in the eyes of ordinary people, the difference between them and flux experts could never be covered. This was the reason why the position of flux experts was almost close to gods in the eyes of ordinary people. Because of that, the scene moments ago had completely overturned their worldview. What were they seeing? A flux expert losing to a physical flux expert? Naturally, the residents could never think that the descenders weren't true flux experts but only fluxers. I will go. Once one of the three other plane descenders had been defeated, a second one walked to the stage. It was another female, and she had enough strength to not shame descenders. She was more powerful than Li Qinghong, almost reaching the level of Ji Wuxin. She had profound flux energy in addition to extremely outstanding deadly skills. In the battle with Suo Lay, she held the advantage, but the result was rather unfortunate. She was able to suppress Suo Lay, but slowly she lost control of the situation because of the astonishing cross-cover armor cultivation method which he used. Nothing was more tragic than encountering an opponent with formidable physical body who also cultivated a defensive cultivation method like cross-cover armor. At this moment, under Suo Lay's precise control, his flesh had been transformed into a grid of small squares. From the outside, it appeared as if he had adorned a meat armor filled with a grid of meat squares. This cross-cover armor cultivation method stopped the second female descender from gaining victory over Suo Lay. After half an hour, once the time limit approached, the female descender hadn't lost but also wasn't able to win. Thus by default, it was considered as her loss. Everyone was in an uproar. They had never expected that the outsiders from East Fisherman Village would be this weak. Chapter 342, Deeply Concealed Secret. Just when the third descender, the male who had the highest strength, was about to step on stage, an unexpected event happened. Boom! A 1.8 m tall lad suddenly rushed ahead of the male descender and stepped onto the stage. Compared to the other natives of the origin world, he wasn't too tall. On the contrary, a height of 1.8 m was considered very short among the natives of the origin world, but he held a weapon in his hand which caused everyone to take a deep breath. The copper pillar he held was 3 meters long and extremely thick, more than 10 tons in weight. When the youth lightly landed on the ground, everyone could sense the whole stage shaking. It is Pan Shan, my god, Pan Shan has finally arrived. Many residents of the town who recognized the short lad began shouting one after another. Even Li Yunmu's interest was caught by Pan Shan. This was a person who had extraordinary innate body constitution. He was a young lad born in an ordinary fisherman family who hadn't cultivated his physical body but still possessed the strength of more than 30 oxen before he was even 20 years old. From the first glance at him, Li Yunmu knew that it wasn't just empty talk. Mother Fasterisker, this is truly bad. A native possessing more than 30 tons of strength. Only in this enormous world could such a monster appear. Pan Shan looked towards Suo Lay and said, "Elder brother Suo Lay, I won't be polite and will start attacking now. Come, if you can beat me, then I will privately impart a body refining method to you. I will also impart the skills that I have collected so far." Good, let's fight. Pan Shan was very excited after hearing this. Instantly, his medium-sized body erupted with energy like a volcano. Raising his 3-meter-long solid copper pillar, he struck towards Suo Lay without using any sort of skill. A pillar cutting through wind with enormous power sounded just like a cannonball exploding in the sky. The turbulence created by the enormous explosion scared the spectators to be scared, and they all retreated. Some people with weak bodies lost their hearing due to the sound created by the copper pillar. After turning dizzy, they left the audience while bitterly supporting themselves out. This was extremely terrifying. At this moment, even the system was so astonished by the data of Pan Shan's strike that it repeatedly notified Li Yunmu about this sort of offense breaking through the horizon and still rising successively. After the initial 108 tons, the attack power rose due to the powerful shockwaves that erupted from the strike. The system estimated that the impact's power was a staggering 786 tons. Li Yunmu was stunned to his feet by this native. An attack with the strength of more than 700 tons was simply too terrifying. It has to be known that Pan Shan only had the strength of roughly 30 oxen. His one punch, without any battle skills, had the strength of 100 tons. But for this fight, he chose a copper pillar which weighed more than 10 tons. According to Li Yunmu's estimation, even a fluxer from his earth who had just entered Sage layer probably wouldn't be able to resist such a strike. It wasn't that sages were weak, but that this lad was too ferocious. It was especially so when his innately formidable constitution was combined with an extremely heavy weapon. At that time, his offensive surpassed what the two strengths would be after being simply added together. Thus, Pan Shan's attack couldn't be evaded by Suo Lay, and he was blown away from the stage. This result was something that even Pan Shan himself hadn't expected. It wasn't that Suo Lay wasn't thinking of resisting or avoiding, but he couldn't because this enormous explosive power was just too terrifying. The copper pillar was both long and heavy, and in fact Suo Lay had been blown away by the shock wave created by the pillar coming toward him. This turned to be a fortune for him, though. Otherwise, if he had taken this strike head-on, then his grid-shaped muscle defense would probably have been shattered completely. Good lad, you win. Our Azure Dragon Isle has finally produced a fierce person. Pan Shan, you will definitely be treated with extreme importance by Blue Moon Island in the future. Although Suo Lay was blown off the stage, he didn't feel the slightest bit unhappy. Instead, he was pleasantly surprised. After this, the town residents shuffled back to the stage and erupted in loud cheers, yelling Pan Shan's name. All of them rushed forward and encircled him. Everyone was clean on the fact that Pan Shan's future prospects were boundless and he would become a hero of Azure Dragon Town who would represent it in front of the whole world. However, Li Yunmu's heart was heavily jolted by Pan Shan's terrifying power. What was absolute power? This was absolute power. Compared to the several insights he had gained previously about absolute power, none of them were as profound as the one he received from Pan Shan today. Although this Pan Shan hadn't learned any skills and was only the lowest class ordinary fisherman, he could sweep through everything only with his innate strength. A strike approaching 1,000 tons, this sort of attack could certainly blow everything away. Even if his pillar struck upon a mountain, the mountain would be shattered. God only knew what stage Pan Shan would be able to reach once he cultivated flux energy in the future. In front of Pan Shan, even Li Yunmu had a deep feeling of helplessness. Probably even his absolute defense wouldn't be able to hold on against that attack. With Pan Shan's name spreading through the whole arena, the fervor of this year's Flux Expert Day reached its peak. Li Yunmu and the other male descender also challenged Suo Lay. But in front of a dazzling star like Pan Shan, their victories didn't attract much attention. After all, Suo Lay wasn't a flux expert. So it could be said that the difficulty this year had substantially decreased due to Suo Lay representing Hall Master Bulletin G in accepting challenges. Perhaps ordinary descenders would find it difficult to win against a peak physical flux expert who didn't have any weak points, but given Li Yunmu's strength, he could easily thwart Suo Lay. During the fight, Li Yunmu didn't use the slightest bit of flux energy. He only relied on his physical strength together with the united offense of the 10 shadows and easily obtained the qualifications to become an inner disciple of Blue Moon Island. Lee Yunmu was able to keep the fact that he was an external flux expert a secret by relying on his formidable physical power, which didn't lose even to that of a physical flux expert of the origin world. Even the three descenders didn't realize that Lee Yunmu was a descender and mistook him for a native. All of this was as Lee Yunmu wanted. When faced with an extraordinary native, the attention of the enemy descenders was divided. Lee Yunmu's plan thus succeeded smoothly, with him entering Blue Moon Island while keeping a low profile. After 3 days, Suo Lay delivered Li Yunmu, Pan Shan, and Zheng Chuan as well as other challengers who had obtained the qualifications to become outer disciples to the main island. While they were being transferred, Li Yunmu hid his killing intent towards the 3 descenders. For the moment, he wanted to see what was the aim of these descenders from other planes. He had a feeling that if Battle Sage and Jing had asked him to investigate Blue Moon Island, then it definitely wasn't simple. Otherwise, with such a large origin world which had myriads of powers, why would these descenders coincidentally choose to stay in Blue Moon Island? His intuition told him that if he could figure out their aim, he would get close to the truth. Chapter 343, Reaching Blue Moon Island. Between the blue sea and the sky, above the boundless ocean, a large creature resembling a walrus and covered in scales from its head to foot was walking into the horizon. This enormous creature was much larger compared to a walrus, with a stature of more than tens of meters, but only the sea beasts without any broadened horizons would dare to attack this enormous beast. On the wide back of this devil elephant, there were a few people sitting at this instant. The person controlling the devil elephant was Suo Lay, who had represented Hall Master Bulletin G 3 days ago. Behind him stood Li Yunmu, Zheng Chuan as well as the innately formidable Pan Shan. On this year's Flux Expert Day, the 3 of them were the ones who had obtained the qualifications to become inner disciples of Blue Moon Island. Behind Li Yunmu and the other inner disciples, there were 5 other challengers who had qualified to become outer disciple. Thus, altogether there were 9 people moving towards Blue Moon Main Island at this moment. North Blue of the origin world was extremely large, so even if Blue Moon Island and Azure Dragon Island were extremely close, the distance between them was more than 1,000 kilometers. This was the group's first time setting out into the sea, and it was almost impossible that they would reach their destination before more than 10 days passed. As for why they couldn't use the transfer channel to reach Blue Moon Island, it was because that place served as the core defense of the area. Due to that, direct teleportation from the small islands under Blue Moon Island's control wasn't permitted. There were only one-sided teleport channels from Blue Moon Island to other islands. While if someone wanted to go the other way around, then apart from obtaining permission, they could only travel through the ocean. That day was already the 9th day. According to Suo Lay's conjuncture, Blue Moon Island shouldn't be far. This time's ocean travel went without any hitch, with them just drifting along with the wind. Thus, it appeared that the time taken to reach Blue Moon Island was much less compared to his imagination. And sure enough, as they got closer to Blue Moon Island, Li Yunmu's group saw another black dots in the horizon. As they got into the vicinity of those black dots of several nautical miles, they could clearly make out what creatures they were. They brought squads from other islands. They were riding on several 100-meter huge ships, but there were also people like Suo Lay who were driving large sea beasts. All these squads were rushing towards Blue Moon Island from all directions. Elder Brother Lay, why didn't our Hall Master create a similar ship with many decks? Although Pan Shan's body constitution was innately formidable, he was just a pure child born in a fisherman family. At this moment, when Pan Shan saw the enormous ships rushing from behind them, he couldn't hide the envy in his eyes. The beast which they were riding couldn't be compared to those several 100-meter-long ships which every islander of the origin world longed for. North Blue of the origin world wasn't like the small oceans of Earth. Most of the people setting out from the subsidiary islands mainly relied upon large sea beasts they've nurtured themselves. This was the main means of transportation for the residents of North Blue. Then what about ships? One shouldn't even dream about them. The 100-meter-long ships built on Earth wouldn't get far in the turbulent waters of North Blue. Those which could travel long distances were all at least 300 meters long. Moreover, there wasn't enough wood to create such large ships. According to what Li Yunmu had learned, there were brass tree, iron pistol tree, and floating raven tree in the vicinity, who had successfully attained the criteria. Azure Dragon Island, though, had none of the above. And sure enough, Suo Lay sighed. It is difficult. Our Azure Dragon Island doesn't have any good wood, otherwise, our economy wouldn't be ranked below 300. Without any good wood to create large ships, they had no means to travel through with ease through the ocean. This then led to their economy lagging behind. Shan, who was a teenager born in a small family, wasn't intelligent enough to do such simple analysis and only had his brain filled with strength. Soon, the several large ships rushed up from behind and overtook the large sea beasts used by people like Suo Lay, gradually disappearing from view as they got farther and farther away. The ships were much faster compared to large sea beasts. The fast speed of these enormous ships with hanging sails couldn't be explained according to Earth's logic. After all, the winds of this world were truly frightening. Those who blew at ocean were extremely turbulent. The so-called grade 12 winds of Earth were considered as the weakest level here, similar to a sea breeze. Hey, so it's like this. It would be great if our Azure Dragon Island also had a large amount of floating raven trees. During the several days at sea, while going with the sea breeze, everyone had endured quite a bit of suffering. While sitting at the back of the large sea beast, they had to make sure that their bodies were always in equilibrium. Not only that, they also couldn't lie down and take nap or make fire and cook food. Most of the ordinary people couldn't endure these sort of hardships. Even the two other descenders at Zheng Quan's side found it unbearable. But fortunately, even if they were proud children of heavens before descending, their strength and foundations were a true deal. They could be considered as the most powerful rising stars of their world, thus in the end they were able to persevere. This sort of circumstances persisted for 2 more days, until at the dawn of the 12th day, an enormous shadow appeared in the horizon. It's Blue Moon Island, we have finally arrived. At this instant, Suo Lay breathed a sigh of relief. He wished to immediately report the matter of his master Buletinji's assassination. If it was not for Flux Expert Day, he wouldn't have waited for so long and would have come immediately. Although they saw the shadow of Blue Moon Island, it still took them a whole afternoon to step foot onto the island. This was the first time that Li Yunmu made contact with a higher-level administrative power after descending. Brother Li, after entering the island, it would be better if we stuck together and looked out after each other. During the journey, Zhang Chuan, the other descender, had tried many times to rope in Li Yunmu. However, this pitiful person didn't know that Li Yunmu was also a descender, because while challenging Suo Lay, Li Yunmu had only relied upon his powerful body. Regardless of whether it was Zhang Chuan or Wang Yan or Luo Honghua, all 3 of them viewed Li Yunmu as a native from another region of the origin world. Perhaps after experiencing the strength of natives, Zheng Quan's party weren't feeling excited about entering the sect of Blue Moon Island. Therefore, they greatly desired that Li Yunmu, this formidable native, would join their side. Chapter 344, One Step Closer to the Target. All right, in the future, I will be indebted to sirs for their goodwill, Li Yunmu replied with a smile as if he had completely forgotten about the matter of Zheng Chuan almost beating his follower to death. It wasn't that he had a big heart, but because he wanted to see what exactly was the purpose of these 3 on Blue Moon Island. He had a feeling that sooner or later, they would be unable to remain patient and take to action. Given this, they were just delaying their death for the time being. It would be better to let them live for the moment, so that they could act as a shield for him and attract the attention of Blue Moon Island unto themselves. After coming to the origin world, Li Yunmu had received many psychological blows which forced him to adapt to the circumstances. Those like Zheng Chuan who hadn't yet realized the reality and still believed that they were proud sons of heavens were bound to suffer the most. Because this wasn't their original world, Li Yunmu was extremely willing to follow them and hide himself. Li Yunmu's reply made Zheng Quan's group overjoyed at the turn of events. It was especially so for Wang Yan. When her charming eyes fell on Li Yunmu, they lit up in delight. During the past few days, she had been gradually attracted to Li Yunmu's extraordinary bearing. He didn't act like the people of the town or the four fishermen villages. His tall but robust figure hidden beneath tight-fitted clothes, a calm and confident expression as well as the enormous potential which wasn't one whit inferior to hers caused Wang Yan to become increasingly more interested in Li Yunmu. Only problem was that she didn't know that Li Yunmu wasn't actually a native. That's excellent. With senior apprentice brother Zheng and elder brother Yunmu, our group of 4 will easily be able to fight against all the other factions of the inner sect. Brother Yunmu, could you tell me more about the customs and people of Lanlu? With a delighted expression, Wang Yan went close to Li Yunmu. Good, actually there are some differences between Lanlu and islands of North Blue. How could Li Yunmu know about a distant region like Lanlu which was in the southern part? He had only weaved this story to deceive Zheng Quan's group. Hai Yu had once mentioned that she would be going to southern regions Lanlu, which he happened to remember. As for what were the customs and characteristics of people of Lanlu he had no clue. It didn't matter if he didn't know though, because the system could immediately compile a heap of information for him. Given that the 3 of them didn't know anything about Lanlu, his story seemed completely true to them. The false story prepared by the system appeared even more genuine compared to true facts. Under these circumstances, the party gradually entered Blue Moon Island. Once they stepped on the land, the 4 were shaken by the enormity of the place. Azure Dragon Island, where they had stayed previously, had the diameter of 10 kilometers, while Blue Moon Island was several tens of times larger compared to it. There was only one town which was naturally more prosperous than Azure Dragon Town. It had a population of approximately 30,000 people. According to Suo Lay, the people living in Blue Moon Island were actually several generations and relatives of the inner sect disciples. Apart from this, there were no outsider. After learning this information, Li Yunmu secretly lamented in his heart. A large island which could even be considered as a continent and could house more than 10 million people was being used to house only 30,000 people. It had only one town whose population wasn't even enough to call it a city. It wasn't a joke, but rather the worldview of the origin world. They didn't lack the amount of land, even if the world's population was staggering. But simply wasn't concentrated. In fact, it thinly dispersed throughout many places. Therefore, the masters of the origin world weren't actually humans, since their strength wasn't sufficient to occupy the entire world. Humans, various tribesmen, vicious beasts, sea beasts, and devils. The origin world was actually dominated by these 5 races. None of them could be considered as a hegemon who could oppress the others. The origin world was extremely large, to the extent that none of the 5 races could take the whole world for themselves. Thus, this land was actually quite chaotic. There were no determined rules and regulations, and everything was decided by one's fist. Apart from the most suitable and convenient location where Blue Moon Town was established, the true Blue Moon Sect existed in the deepest parts of the vast jungle. That's right, Blue Moon Sect was the power which administered over all the humans of Blue Moon Island. This third-rate sect had several hundred islands under its control. Altogether, it ruled over a population of 10 million people. But all of them were just a subsidiary power. The core of Blue Moon Island were its outer and inner disciples as well as the most important core disciples. It could be said that there was no one from any external power present on Blue Moon Island. It was completely sealed off for its own protection. At this time, Li Yunmu and the others could see that 95% of the entire Blue Moon Island was actually occupied by dense forests. They possessed plenty of natural resources, small animals, birds, and normal beasts like a normal jungle, while the vicious beasts had been completely exterminated. All of them had been wiped out by Blue Moon Sect. Therefore, the people of Blue Moon Island didn't need to trade with people of the dry lands. The vast tropical forests of the island as well as the ocean made sure that they were self-sufficient and lacked nothing. When Suo Lay led everyone into the town, he didn't stop anywhere and handed over those who had obtained the qualifications to become outer disciples to a fellow disciple. Then he guided Pan Shan, Li Yunmu, Zheng Qian, Wang Yan, and Luo Honghua to the depths of the forests where the true Blue Moon sect was located. Originally, Wang Yan and Luo Honghua didn't have the qualifications to become inner disciples because both of them couldn't even defeat a peak physical flux expert Suo Lay. But given that both of them cultivated flux energy, Suo Lay subconsciously viewed them as flux experts. Therefore, he didn't dare to make any decision about them and led the two females to Blue Moon Sect. After all, Blue Moon Sect treated the matter of foreign flux experts who desired to take shelter quite seriously. Although these two flux experts were as weak as chickens, they were still foreign flux experts and thus there was no reason to leave them behind with the outer disciples. After spending another half-hour, the party entered the only mountain of Blue Moon Island, thus entering the region which was restricted to outsiders. By this time, the sun had gone down in the west and the color of the sky had begun to turn dark. We will first go to the residences of inner disciples. Tomorrow, I will take you all to my uncle master who will make the decision about our Azure Dragon Island. When all was said and done, Suo Lay was only a disciple of Bulletin G. He naturally didn't have the authority to make arrangements for Li Yunmu and the others, thus everyone including Suo Lay arrived at the place where the sect provided them with command badges of the inner disciples of the sect. After registering themselves, they received inner disciple command badges behind which was engraved their residential address. This year, Suo Lay's sustained efforts had finally come to fruition and he could now step across the threshold to become a genuine flux expert. The party quickly arrived at their residences which were in the 15th residential region. Chapter 345, Parasite Nurturing Method. The 15th residential area was a newly opened place at the foot of the mountain. When Suo Lay led the other 5 inside, everyone discovered that even if it was just one of the residential areas for inner disciples, there were many fellow disciples present there. The 15th region had 300 rooms. With a careful observation, Li Yunmu and the others discovered without much difficulty that every room had a number weaved on it in an eye-catching way. From room 1 to room number 300, all of them were arranged in an orderly fashion with scattered woods at the foot of the mountain. Among them, the rooms at the front were already occupied. Li Yunmu and the other newly added inner disciples were offered rooms starting from number 230. Those rooms at the front and our rooms which are numbered at the back. What is the difference between them? Being a newcomer, everyone was forced to choose a room at the rear. After settling down, Zheng Chuan impatiently mentioned what was on his mind. After some pondering, Suo Lay honestly replied to his question. The lower the number of the room, the higher the strength of the person occupying it. We are newcomers so our numbers are high. But if you think you have enough strength, you can challenge the masters of the rooms with lower numbers. If you win against them, you can occupy their room. Naturally, you also need enough strength to ensure that you can respond to challenges against you in the future. Although he knew that this group of outsiders cultivated flux energy, they were really too weak. Within a short time, there was no hope for them to occupy the rooms with lower numbers. You mean to say that if we can occupy the rooms with lower numbers, we would be able to obtain great benefits? What are those benefits? Li Yunmu immediately caught the crucial point. It's regarding the number of blue moon coins you will receive every day. If you can occupy a room ranked in the first 10 and successfully hold on to it for a month's testing period, then you will obtain extremely beneficial qualifications to become a hall master, like my master, at a subsidiary island. When Suo Lay talked about his master, an expression of fascination appeared on his face. But he quickly remembered that Bulletin G had already perished. Thus, he lost all the excitement to continue talking. Regardless of how much Zheng Chuan or other descenders hoped that he would explain more so that they obtain more information as quickly as possible, he did not say another word. Everyone then could only drop the subject and disperse. The room chosen by Li Yunmu was numbered 235, which was exactly the last room among the 6 of them. With his strength, he could have easily obtained the 230th room. But he didn't do so because there was little point to it when there was so little difference between them. The rooms at the rear didn't have much of a disparity between them. His generous act, however, gained everyone's favorable opinion since he himself took the initiative to choose the last-ranked room. Putting the key in front door of room number 235, he erected a wooden plate outside. It signified that beginning from that moment, it was his first private property after entering Blue Moon Island. It could be expected that other newly added inner disciples from subsidiary islands would also receive the same treatment. He suddenly realized that the disciples of the officials of the origin world walked a completely opposite path compared to the disciples of powers of Earth. The position of disciples nurtured by the powers of Earth depended on their innate talent. As long as they had outstanding innate talent, their future path would be extremely smooth. The sect would pour all of its resources in nurturing the small number of outstanding talents to make them formidable. As for those who had mediocre talent, they could only rely on their own tenacity and hard work. Their path was extremely difficult for people with inferior talent. There was basically no hope for them to become people of importance. However, the sects of the origin world were polar opposites. They didn't seem to care about anyone's innate talent or aptitude, not paying any attention to the disciples' actions after entering the sect. They also didn't provide anyone any basic cultivation methods or offensive flux skills unconditionally. Everything depended on the disciples' efforts, their struggle for that sliver of benefit and opportunity. That's how Blue Moon Sect operated. They had formulated some regulations, and as long as the disciples didn't violate the rules, their actions were their own business. The newly added disciples like Li Yunmyu were placed within the residential area to start their struggle. This arrangement clearly implied that strength here was the only truth. It was like a breeding ground of parasitic insects, without anyone treating any inner disciple as humans. What Li Yunmyu found most unimaginable was that the newly entered disciples easily accepted this sort of unfair treatment. This was the difference between the powers of Earth and the sects of the origin world. This was also the difference in attitude between the people of Earth and the origin world. Li Yunmyu could already faintly hear the indignance in the voice of Wang Yan and Luo Honghua. These two proud daughters of heavens were really unable to accept their new reality after entering Blue Moon Island and hadn't attached any importance to the facts. But this wasn't their world. Clearly, they hadn't adapted according to this fact, and since they were unable to adapt to the environment, they naturally would end up washed out. Li Yunmyu didn't feel any disappointment regarding the origin world's cruel nurturing, but was secretly excited. He discovered that this complete freedom of the origin world was to his liking. Given that he possessed the hack system, he definitely didn't want to be bound and controlled like the disciples of his Earth sects. What made him even more satisfied was the privacy a person received within the 15th residential region. After surveying house, the first thing he discovered was a piece of animal fur placed on the only table in the room. On top of it, a few lines were written, which were probably related to the rules of the origin world. There were 4 rules in total. The first one was that no one can barge inside a room which has a master. All offenders would be expelled from the sect. The second rule was that no one can kill a fellow disciple in a private battle. All offenders would be exterminated. The third rule was that every person had to complete a core assignment of the sect. After it was completed, the disciples would obtain the qualifications to continue staying on Blue Moon Island. All offenders would have a certain amount of contribution points deducted from their total accumulated points. Once the total turned negative, the offenders would be expelled from Blue Moon Island. The fourth rule was that once a person was challenged, they had the right to reject another challenge for 7 days. This way, no one would be able to challenge the same person again and again. Apart from this, the number of ranks between every challenger and defender should surpass 50 ranks. Chapter 346, Failure Means Death. It wouldn't be the slightest exaggeration to say that the sect rules of Blue Moon Sect were extremely simple. There were few restrictions, which was in accordance to Li Yunmyu's thinking. The house itself wasn't very large, it had only 1 room. In one corner, there was a basin to rinse the mouth and wash the face. Apart from this, there was also a four-legged table. In place of bed, there was a soft quilt, and that was it. Li Yunmu had to say that it was exceptionally simple and crude. He locked his door. Since the regulations of the sect determined that no one could barge inside someone else's room, he wasn't afraid that others would intrude without him knowing. On that night, he didn't do anything else and went straight to sleep. On the dawn of the second day, Suo Lay knocked on his door early in the morning and led everyone up the mountain to meet with Suo Lay's uncle master, who was also the senior apprentice brother of Buletin and cultivated within the mountain. It was said that his strength had already reached great flux expert level, and he could be considered as part of the middle high echelon in Blue Moon Sect. Since Suo Lay's master had been assassinated, he naturally had to inform his uncle master. A great flux expert wouldn't have any special position if put in a comparable position on Earth. However, none of the descenders believed that this was the case. The physical power and strength of the great flux experts was not something which flux masters of Earth could compare. Simply speaking, the difference between the strength of flux experts and fluxers was extremely large. Then what about the difference between great flux experts and flux masters? According to the limited information collected by the system, it was highly possible that the strength of a great flux master of the origin world was comparable to a nirvana flux master or even a flux sage who had recently entered the sage layer. Once Li Yunmu heard this conclusion, even though he was prepared in his heart, he was still so astonished that cold sweat covered his back. The person they were going to meet was actually formidable to the extent of being comparable to a new flux sage. Everyone climbed up the mountain for a long time, and finally at noon, they saw Buletin's senior apprentice brother. His name was Buletin. When he learned that Buletin had been assassinated, he was enraged and decided to personally make a trip to Azure Dragon Island and settle all the responsibilities of the deceased. He reluctantly accepted Li Yunmu, Zhang Chuan, Wang Yan, and Luo Honghua as his faction's disciples. As for Pan Shan, this teenager with innately extraordinary body constitution, Buletin viewed him in favorable light and kept repeatedly looking at him. But although they had been reluctantly accepted into Buletin's faction, there were almost no benefits. At least, until they gained several accomplishments among the inner disciples. Even if they all came from the same place named Azure Dragon Island, Buletin didn't put them in his eyes just because of that. This is Flux Bonding Pill. Given that I am representing Buletin, this will be my gift on meeting you all for the first time. As for what use it has, that you can find out on your own. Now disperse. Apart from Pan Shan, who received many glances from Buletin, others, including Suo Lay, were coldly commanded to disperse. Senior apprentice brother Suo Lay, this uncle master Buletin is too cold-blooded. We properly paid our respects to him, but he only casually tossed out a pill to us and asked us to leave quickly, Luo Honghua bitterly complained. Uncle Master Buletin is already quite liberal, you just don't understand. Pan Shan, who has innately extraordinary body constitution, should be the only one who attracted Uncle Master's attention. Suo Lay looked at Zhang Quan's group of three with astonishment, feeling that these outsiders didn't make any sense. Given their shallow relationship, they had already received a flux bonding pill, so what were they unsatisfied with? At least in the opinion of natives like Suo Lay, Buletin's action was very ordinary. It could even be seen as generous. Suo Lay was unable to understand these people, what exactly were they resentful about? In the opinion of natives of the origin world, everyone should struggle by themselves to obtain their own opportunities. How could they hope that others would bestow things upon them for no reason? With this argument, the group from Azure Dragon Island parted on bad terms. When Li Yunmu returned to 15th residential area, he found that the place was bustling with many fellow disciples. The majority of them cultivated flux energy, but some of them were like Suo Lay, who had recently achieved the peak of physical cultivation and had just entered. Hey, have you heard? 13th rank is going to challenge 10th rank. Let's go quickly. Ma Wang is challenging He and Shen? Interesting, let's go. We should hurry over and take a look. Once Li Yunmu and the others returned to the residential area, they learned that something big was about to happen, which involved the challenge to the 10th rank. Li Yunmu and the others obviously wouldn't miss such a chance to see a battle between flux experts of the origin world. Instantly, they followed after fellow disciples moving in a single direction. While hurrying over, they tried to gather information from. They spoke that within the past 3 months, no one had dared to challenge the masters of rooms ranked between 1 to 10 in the 15th residential area. Yet at the moment, one person decided to fight for the 10th room. This then instantly made the entire residential area lively and bustling. While hurrying forward, Zheng Chuan asked someone, "Brothers, are the top 10 so powerful that no one dared to challenge them in the past few months? Are you a newcomer? No wonder you asked this question. As for whether the top 10 are powerful or not, just wait until you see and then you will know." Quickly, people from everywhere in the 15th residential area ran to the houses at the front. When Li Yunmu's group rushed to the venue after everyone, the master of the 13th house, Ma Wang, had already begun waiting for the challenged. Opposite him was a middle-aged man with a sinister expression on his face. Presumably, this was the master of the 10th house, He and Shen. After gathering information, Li Yunmu learned that this seemingly middle-aged He and Shen was actually only 23 years old. His face just appeared to be quite aged. "I was prepared to wait for another 2 months to become a hall master of some island, yet Ma Wang, you could not even wait for this short while." He and Shen was in quite a bad mood after being forced to abandon his cultivation. 2 months is a long time. Today I will definitely seize the 10th house, otherwise, I will die, Ma Wang said with a flushed face, breathing heavily. He and Shen walked out of his house. Heavy pressure radiated off him, but even though he didn't want to fight, he didn't have any choice. He had to pour his everything into this fight to keep his qualifications. "Then you better die." Previously, he hadn't showed any killing intent towards Ma Wang, but now he was filled with it. In the 4 rules of Blue Moon Sect, killing wasn't permitted in private battles. But that didn't mean that there were any restrictions in public challenges. Whether someone died or was crippled, the sect wouldn't pay any attention to it. Thus, the masters of the houses ranked in the first 10 would often kill all the challengers in order to intimidate others. It could then be seen that the 15th residential area wasn't a harmonious living area, but one filled with savageness and cruelty. Every day, several people would be killed in merciless challenges. Chapter 347, Large Amount of Data. Challenging a person wasn't a child's play. If one lost the battle, it was highly possible that they would also lose their life, based on what the other disciples said. Li Yunmu already knew that the masters of the top 10 houses weren't a bunch of soft-hearted people. Moreover, they were all veterans who had stepped on many corpses to reach their current position. Even the disparity between the strength of room number 10 and room number 11 was very large. He and Shen, who occupied room number 10, represented a terrifying horror for everyone excluding the masters of the first 9 houses. Almost no one was optimistic about Ma Wang's chances in this battle, even if there was only a difference of 4 ranks between them. And sure enough, Ma Wang lost and died in the end. His both eyes were still wide open when his head flew into air and he became aware that he had lost. Even in death, Ma Wang was unwilling to accept the result, but he didn't have any remorse for having tried this. He had wanted to obtain the qualifications to obtain the 10th house, but under He Mianshan's hands, he couldn't last even for a minute. The difference between the top 10 ranked people and those ranked afterwards was like heaven and earth. The latter could never step across former's boundary. In the crowd, someone said with extreme desperation the sentence which was in everyone's heart. "This really is too disappointing." Even Ma Wang was unable to shake their positions. "Who knows how long we will have to wait before we can dip our fingers into the top 10 houses." Vu. Li Yunmu took a deep breath and retreated from his sea of consciousness. After coming to the origin world, the system has lost its most practical assistance function. It was the large database it contained. The origin world also didn't have any online network, which made it even more difficult for the system to gather data. However, this time's battle between the 13th and the 10th rank was the first good opportunity to gather some new data. Regardless of whether it was Ma Wang or He and Shen, the power with which they erupted during the battle, their speed, combat power, and so on were all recorded by the system. After the final analysis, Li Yunmu learned that unless he used the 3 parts of Azure Dragon deity battle suit, he wouldn't be able to prevail over Ma Wang, not to mention challenging He and Shen. This result caused the hint of impetuousness concealed within Li Yunmu to evaporate. Azure Dragon deity battle suit was his trump card, so he definitely wouldn't use it in public. Otherwise, the descenders from other planes would realize that he was also a descender. As for the data gathered from battle between He and Shen and Ma Wang, the system decided to discard the majority of data regarding Ma Wang. After all, he was only a master of the 14th room, nowhere near close to becoming Li Yunmu's goal. Thus, the target for systems data gathering was the master of the 10th room, He and Shen. During the battle, he had revealed powerful flux energy fluctuations. The system awarded him 73 points. Ma Wang wasn't able to force him to display his true strength, so the system then made a conservative conjuncture and placed his true flux energy at 89 points. As for Li Yunmu, the most powerful fluctuations of his flux energy only had the value of 53. In other words, the opponent was 36 points in terms of flux energy strength higher than him. According to the discrete inquiries made by Li Yunmu regarding the number of flux points opened by He and Shen, he had opened 56 of them. In other words, this ranked 10th He and Shen was still 16 flux points away from opening the most basic layer of 72 flux points. But even then, the fluctuation value of his flux energy strength was already 36 points higher compared to that of Li Yunmu, who had opened his 72 flux points. What was going on here? The explanation was very simple. Everything was because of their innate ability to hold flux energy being higher compared to that of humans of Earth. After a detailed comparison by the system, things became much clearer. Just in terms of the fluctuations of the flux energy, even if Li Yunmu had opened 72 flux points, he still wasn't He and Shen's opponent. Apart from this, the data gathered by the system about He and Shen's body strength was just as astonishing. According to what he displayed in the battle, he had surprisingly attained the strength of 23 oxen. Li Yunmu's current body strength, according to the system's calculation, was 18 oxen. That's right, even if Li Yunmu was only a human from Earth, his corporeal body's strength had already surpassed that of a physical flux expert of the origin world. His highest power reached 18 oxen. Compared to this world's most basic condition of attaining 15 oxen's power for starting to cultivate, he wasn't only qualified but even surpassed it. Yet the system's final analysis was that if Li Yunmu didn't use his parts of Azure Dragon deity suit as well as Flame Thunder Sun, then even if he cultivated Violent Blade, Insect Step, Spirit Pincer Step, World Killing Fist, and other high-level battle skills, he would still only have 50% chance of winning when faced with He and Shen. This was because the physical strength as well as the flux energy of the opponent greatly suppressed him. Moreover, it wasn't like He and Shen didn't have any battle or flux skills on him. After gathering data from the battle, Li Yunmu gained a relatively clear understanding about the strength of peak-level flux experts of the origin world. Given these facts, it wasn't a wonder that the system had judged the great flux experts of the origin world comparable to flux sages of Earth. He and Shen? He was only a flux expert who had opened 56 flux points and nothing more. And as for the comprehensive strength of flux experts of the origin world, the more flux points they opened, the more powerful their flesh would become after being nourished by flux energy. With the data on He and Shen, the system quickly made a rough estimation about the strength of a pinnacle flux expert who had opened all 108 flux points. Their flux energy strength most likely reached the value of 180, while they were likely to possess the power of 50 oxen. This was the rough conjunction made by the system about the strength of pinnacle flux experts. Even if there was some deviation from the system's conjunction, it should only be minute. The disparity is truly very large. When Li Yunmu learned about the ultimate strength of flux experts according to the data, he felt it was a little bit inconceivable. Chapter 348, Difference between humans of different planes. Li Yunmu had to admit that with his present strength, he had the confidence of prevailing over all descenders from Earth except Bladewood's Blade Devil. Whether it was Zihanbei or Mantian or anyone else, all of them were far from being his opponents. Yet even then, as a fluxer who could almost be considered as the most powerful flux disciple, he barely had one-third the strength of an average peak flux expert. In other words, if flux experts were divided into 4 levels low, mid, high, and peak, then Li Yunmu's current strength would only be compared to that of a powerful low-level flux expert, barely reaching the mid-level. He was a step away from attaining the strength of a genuine mid-level flux expert, let alone that of a high-level one. By then, Li Yunmu had become completely clear about the level and position of flux experts in the origin world. A peak flux expert's strength was around 180 points in flux energy and had the power of 50 oxen. Li Yunmu's current strength was only at 53 points or 18 oxen. Although he was somewhat discouraged, his mood was still all right. With the assistance of the system's accurate analysis, he at least had a clear direction and goal for which he had to work hard. And at the moment, he knew what his first step should be. He needed to find a mystical technique to strengthen his flux points. Since the body constitution of the people of Earth was weak compared to the natives of the origin world, then his first priority had to be to patch up this deficiency. Li Yunmu was convinced that since the flux points had been researched for such a long time in the origin world, there certainly had to be a mystical technique to strengthen them postnatally. There wasn't any such method on his Earth, which had to be due to the history of his Earth's flux cultivation being too short. In comparison, the flux experts of the origin world had already existed for tens of thousands of years. That was why Li Yunmu dared to be certain that there was definitely a mystical technique to strengthen flux points in this world. While he was inputting large amount of data into the system, Zhang Chuan was talking to some other residents of the residential area 15. This senior brother, what's the difference between the natural resources received by the masters of the first 10 rooms and those of others? I could see that everyone here is struggling to become a master of one of the first 10 rooms, Luo Honghua said. The senior brother she approached was unable to resist in front of the charming and sweet voice of Luo Honghua and told them everything he knew, with complete honesty. Junior sister, have you come from some influential clan to gain experience? What makes you think so? Quite simple actually, a petite but exquisite woman like you could only exist in an influential clan. Take a look at the few women around here. Which one of them isn't large and crude? The senior brother answered with an honest smile while rubbing his scalp. When Li Yunmu, Zhang Chuan, and the others paid attention to what the honest senior brother mentioned, they immediately understood what he meant. There were indeed some female flux experts here, but even if they were female, they had the height of 1.9 m and a robust body. As for the male flux experts, the body stature of the majority of them was also similar to this, reaching the height of nearly 2 meters. There were even some formidable ones whose height surpassed 2.5 m. After surveying the surroundings, the descenders could see that there were almost no females like Wang Yan and Luo Honghua, reaching only the height of 1.7 m. There were a few, but they were extremely low in number. In this group of stinking ducks, they were like a couple swans, extremely eye-catching. As for males like Li Yunmu who had the height of 1.8 m, they were quite conspicuous. Thus, the majority of disciples knew that the identity of Li Yunmu's group was special at first glance. The people of the residential area 15 thus committed a mistake by believing that Li Yunmu, Zhang Chuan, Luo Honghua, and Wang Yan, these 4 strangers, had come from some influential clan in the central continent to travel around and gain experience. Because of this, their group hadn't been oppressed greatly in the residential area after joining Blue Moon Island. Otherwise, they would have been forced to endure the parasitic nurturing of this place. Everyone considered them to be people with a great background and status who had come out to gain experience. They were like children of nobility mixing with common people. This was completely out of the expectations of Li Yunmu and the others that the natives would mistake their identity. However, it made the matters more convenient for them and saved them a lot of trouble. Due to the discussion with the honest senior brother Shi Liang, Li Yunmu's group of 4 learned a lot of new things. Compared to Suo Lay, who had many apprehensions about Li Yunmu's group and thus was tight-lipped, Shi Liang presented them plenty of information. Although the natives of the origin world were divided into 5 classes: servants, civilians, bourgeois, officials, and the influential clans, just earning enough money was not enough to earn respect. Even if one worked hard or earned the required capital to attain the rank of an official, it didn't necessarily mean that other people would regard them as such. Even if some person fulfilled the conditions required to become an official, those who had been such for many generations would not approve. This sort of thing was exactly what happened between an emerging family and a genuine influential clan on Li Yunmu's earth. Did the emerging families not have any money or position in society? They did have it, and they may even be more wealthy than the genuine influential clans. However, they still wouldn't be respected because of their shallow history. Given that the circumstances in the origin world, the fishermen and servants of every large island in North Blue who had gained the emblem of a official after the great effort of many generations still weren't good enough. There existed a large gap between them and the old officials and influential clans of the central continent. One of the main reflections of that were the sizes of bodies. Among the higher class natives of the origin world, there was an idea that those with large stature who had great brute force were all barbarians. People like Li Yunmu, Wang Yan, or Zheng Chuan belonged to the lowest class of servant, but in the eyes of natives, they weren't considered as such. Their distinctive features betrayed everything. Once Wang Yan and Luo Honghua learned of this, they were both startled and joyous in their hearts. Given this, wouldn't all descenders be mistaken as nobles in the eyes of natives? This was something that the proud sons and daughters of heavens fully approved. As for the question about why would 2 such greatly different physiques would appear in the world, the answer was quickly revealed by Shi Liang. It was because of appearance-preserving secret method. What was appearance-preserving secret method? The simplest explanation would be that it was a secret method to preserve the humanity's most optimum body stature. As the human body became more powerful, it increased in height and became more robust, without any limit. This, of course, was unacceptable. Chapter 349, Reward System. Upon becoming a great flux expert, the body of that human would have already surpassed the power of 50 oxen. With their new height, they would lose agility and flexibility. Furthermore, they would appear even more vulgar and crude from the outside, and so 20,000 years ago the upper-class natives researched and developed an appearance-preserving secret method. If a person started to cultivate this appearance-preserving secret technique while refining their physical body at the start of cultivation, their bodies wouldn't continue to grow without any limit. However, this appearance-preserving secret method wasn't circulated publicly. Only those from the genuine ancient influential clans had the qualifications to cultivate it. Because of this, the natives of the origin world who were classified into 5 classes were also divided into 2 major communities. Those who hadn't cultivated the appearance-preserving secret method were known as barbarians, while those who cultivated this appearance-preserving secret method were known as Imperials. Among the barbarians and Imperials, the latter were bound to possess an undeniable position of superiority. This innate sense was similar to the disparity between nobles and ordinary people in the ancient times. Li Yunmu hadn't expected that apart from the strict hierarchical order, the origin world would also have such a complex division. As for why all the inner disciples struggle to gain the one of the top 10 rooms, the reason behind it was quite simple. The masters of the top 10 rooms would receive a certain amount of contribution points every day additionally to what was awarded to other inner disciples. As for the uses for these contribution points, Shi Liang told them that they were extremely useful. Within the inner residential region, Two types of points were used. First were life points, which were also called blue moon points, while the other type was contribution points. Life points could be used to purchase goods for regular livelihood and to exchange for items from other inner disciples, or even contribution points. For instance, the exchange rate between them was 100 to 1. The second type, contribution points, were a higher level currency. They could be used for flux point opening secret techniques as well as physical offensive skills, flux skills, battle skills, and even secret techniques and cultivation methods. But the most important thing was that they could also be used to purchase Blue Moon Sect's official positions, which were quite similar to administrative positions on Li Yunmu's Earth. These positions were extraordinarily important, because they were directly related to one's future cultivation speed. For instance, the lowest level position was the Hall Master of a subsidiary island's Island Hall, like that of Azure Dragon Island's Hall Master Buletin G. He had used contribution points to purchase this position. Above Hall Master was the position of an Island Master of a subsidiary island. Above it was Field Master, who was a master of many subsidiary islands and had much more authority compared to a simple Island Master. As for the reason why these official posts were related to the future cultivation speed, Shi Liang didn't know due to his status. This had to be a secret which only people who attained an official position of Hall Master or above were allowed to know. Li Yunmu and his group had never anticipated that the cultivation system of the sects of the origin world would be so bizarre, completely surpassing Earth's cultivation setup. Probably only someone with a broken head would be able to imagine that cultivation and official posts might somewhere be so closely related. Li Yunmu had a feeling that the official posts were related to a number of dimensional crystals one might obtain. This far, he had killed countless vicious beasts and sea beasts in the origin world, but he had been unable to obtain even a single dimensional crystal. Then how did the flux experts of this world open their flux points? This question should also have some relation to the official posts, since the number of contribution points was related to the purchase of official posts. After learning all this, the group became clear about why all the inner disciples were struggling for the top 10 positions. The reason behind it was simple, because occupying one of the front 10 rooms was a stable means of earning contribution points. By taking possession of one of the rooms for a day, they would obtain 1 day's worth of contribution points. The owners of the rooms after the first 10 were awarded resources every day in terms of life points. Depending on their room number, the number of life points awarded would be judged. Reportedly, Blue Moon Island had 30 inner residential regions and each one had 300 independent rooms. If the room occupied by a person happened to be the room number 300, then the number of life points received by them every day would be 0. Not even 1 life point would be awarded to the last person. Occupying the 299th room would get the person 1 life point, which was basically next to nothing. The concept behind the point awarding system was simple. The number of life points awarded to someone would be equal to his current room number subtracted from 300. If someone occupied the 11th room, then they would be awarded 289 life points every day, which was the maximum amount of life points awarded through this system. For the masters of the top 10 rooms, the resources would change. As long as they kept their room, they would obtain 10 contribution points every single day. Given the rate of exchange, 10 contribution points were equivalent to 1,000 life points, which was a drastic increase compared to the life points obtained by the master of the 11th room. Because of this reason, the front 10 rooms had always been the aspiration of every inner disciple. After fully understanding the point awarding system, Zheng Xuan couldn't help but ask impatiently, the lowest post of Hall Master, how much contribution points are required to purchase this post? It requires 10,000 points, earning which isn't easy. We are just too far away from that number, Shi Liang replied with a bitter smile across his face. What? 10,000 contribution points? Doesn't that mean that if we wish to purchase the official post of Hall Master, we'd have to occupy the front 10 rooms for at least 2 to 3 years? In an instant, everyone was terrified by the gigantic number. It meant that for a few years, they would have to stake their all for the lowest class official position. After all, the masters of the front 10 rooms had to experience one challenge after another continuously. It was hard to imagine them lasting forever under such a situation. Thinking of this, even Lee Yun-mu felt a headache. This amount of time was too long, he didn't want to waste so much of it. As he thought that, another resident standing nearby spoke up. Being the owner of the top 10 rooms isn't the only method to obtain a fixed amount of contribution points. It's just the baseline. In truth, if you have the strength, purchasing the post of a hall master isn't too difficult. What do you mean by this? Don't tell me that there's some secret way to quickly earn contribution points. When Lee Yun-mu and the others heard it, they all turned pensive. But the fellow disciple who had previously explained didn't continue speaking. Clearly, the fellow disciples had many apprehensions about the rivals from the influential clan, so they naturally didn't show any kindness toward Lee Yun-mu and his group. Shi Liang telling them this much could already be considered a show of great sincerity. Chapter 350, Hacking Life Points. Without anyone noticing, 5 days passed since Lee Yun-mu's party had entered Blue Moon Island. In these 5 days, the 4 of them had always been together. They walked around the residential region and gradually became familiar with the struggles within their new living space. During that time, Lee Yun-mu also received information from Li Qinghong and Demon through secret summons. Battle Sage Vega had prepared many resources for Lee Yun-mu before he had descended to the origin world, and among them were a few summoning crystal cranes. This sort of precious summoning treasure would be considered a family heirloom used only in the most critical situations on their Earth. But Battle Sage Vega had prepared 4 of them for Lee Yun-mu. Naturally, the purpose of this was so that he would be able to exchange information with the people he knew in the origin world. Because of this, Lee Yun-mu and his followers didn't lose connection even after entering different subsidiary islands. Lee Yun-mu was convinced that people like Man Tian, Hai Yu, Ji Wuxin, and others also possess similar methods. From this, he knew that becoming the representative of Battle Sage Vega had been the correct choice. Otherwise, without the preparations and assistance provided by a quasi-deity, it would have been incredibly difficult for him to establish a connection with his followers in the origin world. What he hadn't expected was that Li Qinghong and Demon would be able to infiltrate Blue Moon Island's other residential regions from their own subsidiary islands. Li Qinghong had entered the 12th residential area while Demon had sneaked into the 6th one. Presently, both of them could already be considered to have fulfilled their first goal. The main reason behind the arrival of their summoning crystal cranes was to inquire about the second objective. Lee Yun-mu only gave them a short command, which was to quickly improve their strength and occupy one of the front 10 rooms of their residential region. It has to be said that although the summoning crystal crane was a precious treasure from their Earth, it was also able to tear across the stable space of the origin world. However, it consumed up all the reserve energy of the summoning crystal crane. Just one trip was enough to use it all up. Before a few days passed and the crane accumulated its energy, it wouldn't be able to leave to transfer back the information. In the 5 days, as more and more people won their battles and arrived at Blue Moon Island, the remaining rooms in the 15th residential area filled up. The several stone rooms which had been empty previously filled with people in the last few days. By then, all the 300 rooms of the 15th residential area had their respective masters. During this time, challenges became a constant thing. The majority of the newly entered disciples successively challenged the masters of the rooms ahead of them. They weren't willing to lag behind in terms of resources by staying in the rear rooms. The newly entered disciples comprised of 3 types of challengers. The first type was like Lee Yun-mu's group who were already flux experts. Regardless of whether they lost their challenges or won, they would be accepted as inner disciples. Origin World's every administrative power or sect didn't pay much attention toward the loyalty of the members to the sect. At least the upper echelons didn't care whether the low-level members were loyal or not. As long as they were flux experts, they wouldn't be rejected. It was almost equivalent to accepting them unconditionally, allowing them to come and go whenever they wanted. Therefore, this group of people had a certain amount of strength. It was highly likely that a number of them had some problems in their old sects, and that's why they had changed sceneries. Because of all sorts of reason, they had entered Blue Moon Island. This group of flux experts was the most active in the challenging phase. They had a certain amount of strength and were quite powerful individually. Thus, although these people were newcomers, they weren't the least bit polite and consecutively raised challenges for several days until they obtained the rooms respective to their strength. The second type of newcomers were naturally people like Suo Lay, who were outer disciples related to hall masters. As long as they satisfied the requirement of physical cultivation, they would be recommended by the hall master to enter the island and thus included in the ranks of the inner disciples. But these second-type newcomers were quite weak and were regarded as the lowest rung in the inner residential region. Suo Lay had appeared to be quite formidable on Azure Dragon Island, but after entering Blue Moon Island's inner residential area, he would only be at the bottom. For the time being, he and the rest in this group could only obtain the rooms at the rear. The third type of newcomers were quite high profile. They were extremely few in number, but each one of them was extremely formidable. The direct result of this small group of people entering was changes in the masters of the top 10 rooms of the residential regions. The 10 hegemons occupying the top 10 rooms had held their positions for 3 months without any changes and suppressed the entire 15th residential region. But after every year's Flux Expert Day and entry of the third type of newcomers, the 10 hegemons were challenged repeatedly. Within a short few days, of the original 10 hegemons, 3 people had already been replaced and suffered tragic ends by the third type of newcomers. As for why they were so formidable, the reason was very simple, because they were elites who had withdrawn from other administrative powers. They had left their original affiliations and entered Blue Moon Sect when they were unable to seize the top positions in their previous organizations and thus had rushed to become Blue Moon Island's inner disciples. It could be said that the organizations that these people were related to were more formidable compared to Blue Moon Island. The people in this group were very strong. Within a few days, they had already replaced 3 of the original 10 hegemons. Perhaps in the next few days, even more people would be pulled down from their high horses due to the continuous challenges. However, the instability at the top had basically next to no influence on Li Yunmu. If he used the combined power of the 10 shadows, occupying one of the top 10 rooms wouldn't be difficult. But he didn't plan to do it for the time being. So in the 5 days, although he also was part of the army of challengers, he only advanced from 200-something room to the 50th room and settled there. When there were some who were unwilling to accept this, Li Yunmu took the initiative to accept challenges from several people within a day and win. Those who were unwilling soon realized that the master of the 50th room was even more powerful compared to masters of the rooms in the front. After this, there was no one who came to challenge Li Yunmu, and he gained a bit of fame in the 15th residential region, because there was no one who dared to have any ideas for his room. After becoming the master of the 50th room, Li Yunmu received 250 life points every day, which was pretty good. But he didn't pay much attention to the ownership of the room, but rather let his gaze fall upon the channels to quickly pile up life points. Given that Li Yunmu possessed 10 shadows, earning life points was quite easy for him. Previously, he wasn't familiar with the residential areas and didn't think that the life points which were difficult to earn for other fellow disciples were actually quite easy for him to accumulate.